going to continue with Mark chapter 12. And we're going to talk about Jesus getting holistic. Everybody say holistic. Now, I know when you look at that, you're thinking, Josh is a poor speller. And you're not wrong. But I have done my research, and you can spell holistic with a W. And I like it better with a W because it's the whole thing. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about the whole thing. We're talking about the whole thing. And so not the absence of something, but the presence of everything. So Jesus gets holistic. And so Mark opens up in chapter 12 here with a parable about a vineyard owner. And this guy develops this vineyard, and he builds it, and he puts in wells, and he puts these men over his vineyard to run the vineyard while he's away. And while he's away, he sends some of his servants to this vineyard to collect the fruit. And the guys that are running and stewarding the vineyard abuse him. And then they send another guy, and they abuse him, and they beat him, and they send him back home. And then they send another guy, and they abuse him, and they're just canceling these guys every time they show up. Until finally he says, you know what, I'll send my son. Maybe they'll respect my son. And then he sends his son, and they kill his son. So this is the parable that Jesus is telling, and they get all, kind of worked up about this, and they were basically practicing cancel culture with what they didn't like to hear, right, with these guys. How many know that cancel culture is not a new thing, and it's not a liberal thing, right? We're right, because conservatives have been canceling things for a long time, by the way. But it's not a partisan issue. It's that when we don't like something, we just say there's no room for that in my life, and that's what they were doing with God's messengers. This is what they were doing with this the one that he is sending, his servants. And it says this, so they knew that when Jesus was sharing this parable, he's like, you guys are in charge. Y'all been in the authority over Jerusalem. You're in authority over the temple system. You're in authority over the synagogues. You're really ruling the children of Israel. And I've been sending messengers. I've been sending prophets, and you've been turning them away. And then he says this, God, the owner of the vineyard is sending his son, and you're killing him. You're going to kill him. And he's prophesying through this parable about what they're going to do. And it says this in verse 12, and they were seeking to arrest him because they were offended by what he is saying, but feared the people. For they perceived that he had told the parable against them, so they left him and went away. So they leave Jesus alone, and then they send out, and we're going to dig pretty deep into Mark 12 today, they send out 3 different regimes to deal with Jesus, to question Jesus, to try to figure out a way to trick him so they can arrest him. Okay, are you tracking? We're getting into Passion Week here, right? This last segment of Mark is really devoted into the last week of Jesus' life. So the first division of people that they send are the Pharisees. We've heard about the Pharisees, right? So the Pharisees are basically experts of all things Judaism. And they really hold true to the oral traditions that are passed down. In fact, they equate oral tradition as much as they do written law. This is the Pharisees. And the Pharisees were basically in charge of not just the religious system. They actually had political leadership. They had political influence. And so they teamed up with the Herodians, and the Herodians they were in it with Herod, and they're working together. And so they're trying to figure out, what do we need to do to pin something on Jesus? And so it says this in verse 13, and they sent to him some of the Pharisees and some of the Herodians to trap him in his talk. And they came and said to him, Teacher, we know that you are true and do not care about anyone's opinion. For you are not swayed, isn't that good? We know you don't really care what people think. For you are not swayed by appearances, but truly teach the way of God. And then they ask him this question. Now the Pharisees are going to question him about civility. How you act as a civilian. How good of a person are you? Are you a good citizen? This is what they're questioning him on. And so this is what they ask. They ask about taxes. Right? All comes down to money, right? Teacher, we know that you're true and do not care about anyone's opinion, but you're not swayed by appearances. But truly, teach us the way of God. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or should we not? But knowing their hypocrisy, he knew that they were trying to trick him. He said to them, why put me to the test? He just leads with it. What are you doing? Bring me a denarius and let me look at it. And this is the coin of the day. And they brought one, and he said to them, whose likeness and inscription is this? Whose face is on there? Whose appearance is on the coin? And they said, Caesar. And Jesus said to them, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. What does render mean? Render means it's not something I'm giving, it's something I'm yielding. So he's saying it already belongs to Caesar. His name's on it. His imprint's on it. Give to Caesar what's Caesar's. What's he saying? He's saying pay your taxes. Be a good citizen. But he doesn't just leave it there, does he? He never just leaves it there. I love it that Jesus just never leaves it there. I love that Jesus just doesn't leave it alone. He decides to take it the extra mile. So he says, render unto Caesar. Yes, pay your taxes. And render unto God the things that are God's. And it says this, that they marveled at him. They marveled at this statement because he said, yes, pay your taxes, but he is also saying this, pay your tithes. Because some people would say, well, Jesus didn't talk about tithing. He did right there. Because you got to understand, in the Jewish mindset, the tithe already belonged to the Lord. That's why it says in Malachi, how do you rob God? By withholding, by not rendering your tithe. Do you get this? Now, the tithe is the 10%. It's the first fruit of what comes in, our income. Did you know that if you are not tithing, you're robbing? You're withholding. You're not rendering unto God's that which is God's. We had a guy years ago when he first started the church. There was a student at Christ for the Nations, and his name's Jaden. He's a Canadian, and he's awesome. He's a Canadian. You got to throw that in, right? Eh? And so Jaden was a cool guy. He played in our band and stuff right when we first started the church. And he had to go home and earn money. He was at Christ for the Nations. He ran out of money, so he had to go home for a year and earn money. And so while he was gone, he said, Pastor Josh, he said, can I leave my golf clubs in your attic? And I was like, yeah, man, sure. Go ahead. Leave your golf clubs in my attic. That's totally cool. Like, you can just leave them here, and when you come back in a year, you can get them. I was like, okay, great. So we just put them up in there. I didn't think about them. I don't play golf. I didn't use them. He's like, if you want to use them, you can. I'm like, no, I'm good. And so he leaves the golf clubs in there. Now, if I would have took those golf clubs and sold them, what would I be doing? I'd be stealing them. I'd be robbing them. But people do this with their tithe all the time. There's something in your house that already belongs to God, and you're not yielding it. You're not giving unto God. You're not rendering. You're not surrendering to God what is already God's. So Jesus is talking about taxes. Pay your taxes. And it's interesting. Most of us don't have a problem. Most of us. We know taxation's theft. Most of us don't have a problem with taxes, but we have a problem with tithing. And most people are willing to pay their taxes without asking any questions, but 10% to God is a big deal. So he says, pay your taxes, pay your tithes. They were asking him about civility, and that's revealed through their money, right? Are you contributing to the society you're a part of? And are you contributing to the kingdom? This is what he's asking. Civility. Kingdom people give unto God what is God's. Then he runs in. Then they're kind of like freaking out. Oh, wow. So the next group of people they send to Jesus are the Sadducees. Everybody say Sadducees. And the Sadducees are going to question him about eternity. They're going to question him about eternal things. And they're going to come to Jesus and they're going to say, hey, Jesus, what happens if a man's spouse dies and his brother decides, because they're in covenant, to take the family, and then when they die and they go to heaven, because the Sadducees didn't really believe in the afterlife. This is why they were sad, you see. Pastor jokes. But they didn't believe in the resurrection. So they're like, when people are resurrected from the dead, who are they going to be married to? And Jesus is like, you're not going to be married when you go to heaven. You're going to be like the angels. You're not going to become angels, by the way. People don't become angels. God doesn't take people because God needs angels. Angels are different than people, okay? You don't grow wings and visit the earth when you go to heaven. You go to heaven as a human, and you're going to worship the Lord. And so he said, but they'll be kind of like the angels. They'll just be there, but they're not going to be married. They're not going to be caught up in their lives. They're just going to be serving God. They're going to be worshiping God. And so they're trying to pin him on this issue of resurrection life. And he says this in verse 24. Jesus said to them, is this not the reason you are wrong? Because you neither know the scriptures nor the power of God. Now the Sadducees were very into the scriptures. They were all about the scriptures. They took them very literal. And he's like, you don't know them. You don't know the scriptures, and you don't know the power of God. Now, some people know the power of God and don't know the scriptures. And other people know the scriptures and don't know the power of God. I think you need to have both. Come on. In fact, you'll function more of the power of God the more scripture that you know. And then he finishes this and he says he's not, and he talks about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Whenever Moses is talking about that, and he makes a statement. He says he is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And then he says this, you're quite wrong. And what he's saying that they're wrong about is their theology on the resurrection. So you have two people, right, that we're talking about. You have the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Now, let me help you. You probably never remember this, so write it down. There was a council called the Sanhedrin. It had 70 seats, all right? And this was like the Jewish court system, kind of like we have court systems in our day. And it was the supreme council for the Jewish people. And the two parties, if you will, were the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And they worked together, but they were also opposed to one another. And they both honored the law, and they both had this political power. But the Pharisees were the more religiously liberal, and they believed in, again, the oral tradition, and they believed that was equal to God. Because someone told me, come on, because Mama said, because Grandpa said, because we think Moses might have said, they held this to as much as they did Torah, the written law. And they controlled the synagogues. Okay, they controlled the local, the little town places where people went and learned. They controlled that. And then you had the Sadducees, the religious conservatives, and they're sad because they don't believe in the resurrection. Good, you're going to remember that. And they interpreted the law more literally. They were literalist. And they did not believe in the resurrection. The chief, the high priest, they controlled the temple. And they really had control of the Sanhedrin. So really, the Sadducees were really the big player here. They had just a little bit more control of the house, if you will. And so why are you telling me all this? Because I want you to understand that Jesus is saying, I'm above the systems. I'm about to teach you something. I'm going above the systems. So he's answering the systems. And there's a third system we're about to get to. So the Pharisees question him about money and civility. The Sadducees question him about eternity. And then what's called the Scribes come along. Now, the Scribes were a different sect of people. They worked with these two parties, these two religious systems, but they weren't just limited to Jerusalem. They were actually expert teachers in the law. So they knew the law. They knew the 613 laws that were written in the Torah. They were experts. They knew the law back and forth. They were the theologians of the day. And so the Pharisees and the Sadducees would consult them a lot up until the point of disagreement. And of course, they canceled once they disagree. So they were hired. This was their profession. They were scribes. They were experts. They were professional theologians. Are you tracking? So it says this. So we see these two groups in. Now the scribes come. Because they're all involved in the political system. Come on. Are you tracking with me? They're all in there trying to get people to buy into a party. That's basically, here's the difference between government and politics. You guys know this, right? It's good to be involved in government, and it's okay to be involved in politics. Because politics ends up becoming about policy and about party and less about people. Right? And government is really there to serve the people. But what people end up doing is they end up serving parties, and that's when they become political. Oh, that'll work okay. They were dealing with this in Jesus' day. You think America's so crazy right now. Listen, this is not a new problem. This is not a new problem. So the scribes, because they're experts in the law, and the law is the authority of morality, they're going to question him about morality. Okay? Again, 613 laws. And so one of the scribes came up and heard them disputing with one another. And seeing that he answered them well, asked him, which command is the most important of all? All right, Jesus, let's see how good of a Jew you are. Which command is the most important of all? And Jesus answered, most important is, hear, O Israel. The Lord our God. The Lord is one. Everybody say one. The Lord is how many? One. And you shall love the Lord, who is one, with all. Everybody say all. All your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all of your strength. And then he says this. He asks him for the one, and then Jesus says the second is like it. The second one is this. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. Now remember that. No greater commandment than these. And the scribes said to him, you are right, teacher. Yeah, he's usually right. He's always right. So you have truly said that he is one and there's no one besides him, to love him with all your heart and with all your understanding, with all your strength, and to love one's neighbor as yourself, as oneself, is much more than the whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. So he's getting this. I mean, we have all of our rituals, we have all these other laws that we're keeping, but you're right, Jesus, more than all these regulations, more than all these worship things that we go through, over all the ritualistic stuff, Jesus, you got it right. The command is heavier than that. It's more weighty. It's more important. And when Jesus saw that he answered wisely, come on, man, I love it if I answer wisely to the Lord. He said to him, you are not far from the kingdom. You're getting it. You're not far from the kingdom. And then after he said this, no one else dared to ask him a question. But I love how he says this, you are not far from the kingdom. He's saying basically your posture is right. You really know what God expects in morality, to love him. You get this. You're not far from the kingdom. You've got the way, you've got the understanding of how your heart's supposed to be pointed. You're getting this. And the kingdom is close. In fact, the kingdom is standing right in front of you. The kingdom is here right now. It's within reach. However, he's just short of it. He's just short of it. How many times are we just short of the kingdom? Maybe you even like, this is what we see in our culture. We see a lot of people liking to quote Jesus. Come on. We have a lot of people close to the kingdom, but they're not in it. We've got a lot of people that know some of the principles of the kingdom, but they don't know the person who is the kingdom. They don't know the king. And listen, to be in the kingdom, you've got to know the king. You've got to know the king. Do you know the king? And this is why he was almost in. This is why he wasn't far from the kingdom, but if he would have embraced the king, if he would have embraced the king, then he would have been in the kingdom. So what does Jesus say? What does Jesus say? The first thing he says this is one Lord. I mean, the whole command starts off right there. It starts with God. It starts with the Lord, and he's one. Now, we know that he's one, but three parts. How many gods are there? Just one, but there's three persons, right? It's like one marriage, two people. God is a unit. He's one. The Lord is one. One Lord, three parts. How many know that you are one with multiple parts? You're created in God's image. You also have multiple parts of you. Lord. Why does it say one? Why does it mention the Lord? Because the Lord decides what's moral. He's the one that we're accountable to. See, most people in our culture, in our day, in our society, in the world, everything is valued through the lens of the second commandment, if you want to call it the second commandment, to love your neighbor. What makes a person good? How good they treat other people. But did you know that in the eyes of God, that you cannot be good without keeping the first part that says love the Lord? Well, I've heard this argument before. What can an atheist do that a Christian can't do? Love the Lord your God. That's that right there. And that is at the center of it all. The Lord decides what is moral because he's the one that we're accountable to. Yes, there's a civil responsibility, but there is also an eternal place that we are building up towards. See, if you're a parent, you decide what the rules are in your house. You decide. They don't get to decide, right? If they decided, it would be different. You get to decide the bedtime. You get to decide how many snacks they have. You get to decide what they watch on TV. You get to decide. You made the rules. Why? Because it's your house. You pay the bills. You breathe the air. right? They pay the dad tax, right? The dad tax, You get to eat off their plate whenever you want. You get to decide because you're in charge. And God gets to decide what morality is. We don't get to decide. We don't get to tell God, I don't like that. Because he's God. And at the end of the day, he decides what morality is because he's the one that we're going to answer to. And he is the one, listen, that you're currently answering to. Whether you realize it or not, whether you're submitted to it or not. And when we don't answer appropriately, we're doing what? Sinning. Listen, since we live on God's earth and breathe his air, then we must abide to his moral standard. And he gives us his moral standard. So Jesus makes it simple. I didn't say he made it easy. He just made it simple. I didn't say that it's not complicated to carry out, but he did make it simple because these guys were enforcing 613 laws, and Jesus said, why don't you just do this? And another time when he mentions it, he says, all the law and the prophets are summed up in this command. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So what does he do? He gives us one command. We look at it as two because it's love God and love others, but Jesus calls it one command. In fact, the word right there is singular. One commandment, no commandment is greater than these. So Jesus takes these two commandments, which are in two different parts of the Torah, and he marries them together. And he says, this is one command I give you. One Lord. One command. I'm going to make it simple. And what's awesome about fulfilling the great command is it takes God to do it. Because if we polled in the room right now, if we went around the room and I said, who has loved God with all your heart this week? We would say, I have. But you didn't. You might have loved him with like 90%, and you would be doing really good at that. But you know that it's a standard that you're not living up to. So Jesus shows up on the scene and says, it's not how good you can keep the law, it's how well you can chase me. One command, many parts. No greater command than these. So Jesus is he's really asking for this thing called holistic love. It's holistic love. See, what most do, y'all okay today? What most do is they compartmentalize their love for God. So you have people in the kingdom that are emotional, right? Then you have people in the kingdom that are intellectual. And usually the intellectuals aren't very emotional, and the emotional aren't very intellectual. Have you ever noticed that? And so we go, well, I kind of love God like this. That's great, but you're also called to love God like that. Even that which you're not naturally bent towards. So really, the command is a stretch for all of us because it hits it at all the levels. It hits it us holistically. And then what others do is they prioritize the love of God. So you go, well, how do you know God's first? Well, he's at the top of the list. You get up to receive the reward, right, at work. I just want to thank God, right? You make sure and say that. Why? Because you put him at the top of the list. Because you think that's the right thing to say. And listen, our priorities do reveal our values. But they really reveal what's central. See, Jesus never asked to be first on the list. The only thing that he said to put first on the list is the kingdom. That's supposed to be your priority. He doesn't say, love me first. He says, love me with all. Love me with all. So what we do is do we have that graphic? We have a list, right? Do we have that list? So this is what we do, right? Y'all ever do this in your notes? And you can click the little things? I love it so much. So good. And at the end of the day, I'm like, oh, yeah, I clicked all the boxes. That's what we do with loving God. We go, oh, Lord, I really felt you during worship today. We are really engaged. I'm loving you with my heart. I spent like 5 minutes this morning reading that blog and my heart was stirred. I loved you with my heart. And Lord, I thought about you today. I was mindful of you today. Oh, I love you with all of my mind. I was feeling you and I was experiencing you. I was loving you with all my soul, right? And so what we do is we have this list and we go, oh, and then depending on where we're at on the genetic makeup that we have, we kind of shuffle this mix. So some people put the love others at the top of the list, right? In fact, most people do, naturally, because they think that's what morality is. No, that's how morality is expressed. That'll work. So this is what we have right here. This is what Jesus is calling us to. Can y'all see that? Kind of see it? Should be in your notes a little bit to see. And so he says this, I don't want you to love me like first with your heart. He's not saying that. He's saying, I want you to love me with all of your heart. I want your heart to be completely and totally obsessed. I want you to love me with all of your soul, with all of your mind, and with all of your strength, and then love neighbors as yourself. What's he saying? He's saying, I want you to take a holistic approach to loving me. Don't just make me a priority of your life. Make me the center of it. And some of you have been trying to fit God in. And you've been doing it for years. Man, God, I know I need to put you first. God, I know I need to put you first. I know I need to put you first. And he's not trying to get first. He's trying to get central. He's trying to be seated on the throne of your life. That's where he wants to be. And some of you just been saying no to it for so long. And you say, well, I loved a neighbor today, or I spent a quiet time today, and I checked that little box. And he's saying, listen, I want more than that. I want all of you. I want holistic love from you. See, everything revolves around Jesus. So the emphasis isn't priority, it's wholeness. Are you tracking? It's not about, oh, I went to church, I checked the box. I fed the hungry, I checked the box. No. This is a lifestyle. This is how you live. It's a holistic approach. And one of the beautiful things about Jews is Jews are very holistic, and not just in the way that they keep Torah. They're also very good about keeping dietary laws, and they're real clean and all this. Why? Because their religion is a holistic religion. So when Jesus is bringing this up, he's like, listen, it's all about the all of you loving all of him. And we like lists. Right? Okay, what do I have to do, God? Can you imagine waking up to your spouse? All right, babe, can you give me 5 things you want me to do today? And after I check them off, then I've expressed my love for you. Right? But we do this with God all the time in our mentality. He wants a holistic approach, okay? So we love him by honoring him in these areas. First of all, with our heart. What does that mean? With all of your heart, all of your motivation. Oh, how are you motivated to live the life that you live? What are the intentions and the desires of your heart? Because some people, listen, a lot of people serve God, and they love God because they're afraid if they don't, they're going to go to hell. I mean, that's just a lot of people. They're like, well, I don't want to go to hell, so I love God. Right? But it's not really driven by desire. Their heart isn't really burning for the Lord. They're not like, man, God, I'm so in love with you. My heart is just directed and set on you. You're my motivation. And this is really what he wants. He wants to be your obsession. He wants that your heart would be totally pointed to him all the time. Direction from the start. You're motivated. When I wake up in the morning, this is the posture of our heart should be Jesus. I'm just connecting with you, Lord Jesus. It's a position of my heart. You don't think that'll keep you from sin? And then he talks about this. Love the Lord with all of your soul. What is your soul? Your soul is your immaterial self. It's the guy that you're talking to or the girl you're talking to when you go to bed at night. The one that I was wrestling with for about 3 hours last night in bed. I was trying to sleep. It's my soul. I'm having this communion. What is this? It's my immaterial self, and it's eternal. And this is where your spirit lives. Right? Just like, did you know that you can have a house and not have a home? Right? But what is a home? A home are those that live in the house. So there's someone that lives in your house. That's your soul. Right? That's like when we go to a funeral and they're like, well, this is just a shell. It's true. Because the person was the one that drove that body. So we are a soul. We live in a body. And one day that body is going to give out. And some of you are so focused on the body that when you get into eternity, you're not going to have anything there for you. Because you've done nothing to invest in the immaterial. So you are not your body, you are the soul that lives in there. The third thing he talks about is your mind, loving God with all of your mind. Y'all okay? Loving God with all of your mind. So this command is intellectual in nature. Did you know that? It's intellectual in nature. Love God with your intellect. See, again, I know people that are really like smart. Like I have to work for that. Am I the only one? You're like, yeah, I know. You spelled holistic with a W. right? I know. But I have to work on the intellectual part. But what I found is that people that are intellectual don't really love God emotional, and those that are emotional don't really love God intellectually. And in charismatics, we're really bad about just loving God with our heart and soul, but not very good at loving God with our mind. So we go, well, it's just blind faith. There's nothing's really based in reason. And so when you don't have emotion, what ends up happening is you end up departing. So you should love God with your mind. You should be smart. You should be a master theologian. In fact, can I tell you, you already are? It's just based upon your belief systems and what you think. You shouldn't just know God personally. You should know about God. You should know doctrine. Doctrine is it's a really good thing. You're not just reading the word just to feel. I just want to feel your nearest. Yes! Don't ever get away from that. But also, you should be studying the Lord. Listen, beloved, I am a student of God. I'm a student of his affections. I'm a student of his emotions. I'm a student of his nature, of how he functions. I'm learning who he is. What am I doing? I'm loving him with my mind. I'm being mindful. I'm making decisions that I'm thinking through because I want God to be honored in the place of my mind. So Jesus says to love him with all of it. Wow. How often do you think about God? Listen, if you did 10%, you're doing pretty good, I think. But that's not the command. The command is 100%, all of it. Wow, the standard's so high. It's simple, but it's high. Are you continually realigning your thinking? Because some people go, well, that's the way I think. It's the way it is. Better not be. You better be asking God what he thinks and aligning your thoughts to his thoughts. That's how you love God with your mind. So, and then he says this, love God with all of your strength. How much of it? All of it. All of your heart. Well, but what about my wife? Love God with all of your soul. All of your immaterial self. All of your mind, your will, your emotions, all of that. Love God with all of your determination. Love God with all of your mind, your intellect, the way that you think, how you think, what you think about. It's high standard. And then he says this, love God with all your strength, all your might, all your ability, your strength, your might, your ability, all that you can. With every bit of energy that you have. And what we tend to do is we don't love God with all of our strength. We love God with the strength that's left over. So we spend our strength living our life, doing our thing, powering through stuff, living from our strengths, doing tests to determine our strength so we can be really good at it, but we don't really love God with those things. In fact, typically what we do is we take our strengths and we justify our distance from the Lord. Well, I don't really love God with all my strength because, I just don't really need to. We don't see the need. But he's calling us to that. Not with the leftovers. So I'll go to work for 8 hours a day. I won't think about God hardly at all. I won't really think about my neighbor at all. I won't be emotionally connected to God throughout the day. And then maybe at the end of the night, I might squeeze in 5 minutes of quiet time. And we go, yes, I love the Lord my God with all my heart. No, you don't, but it's okay. Jesus met the standard. The issue is, are you pointed towards it? Is this your aim? Is it central? Is it the focal point of your life? So, and then he adds this one. And the second is like it. But again, it's one command. It's not just love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That is not the great command. The great command is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Not in spite of yourself, not instead of yourself. Come on. But love God, love others as you love yourself. The way that you would love yourself. Treat others the way that you would want them to treat you. Not in spite of, not instead of. And so for me, when I read this and I'm going, man, Jesus is a high standard. It's beautiful, but it's high. If we love God with all, how can we love anything else? Right? If I love God with everything, how can I love anything else? How can I love my wife? How can I love the people in my church? How can I love the guy on the street, my neighbor? How can I love them if I love God with everything? Listen, we love him with everything and through everything. The motivation we live with, the affection we give, the attention that we give to him, the determination we live out of, the demonstration of his love towards others. That's how you love God, with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. It's not, listen, it's a method. Are you tracking? It's the way that you live. It's a holistic approach. Are y'all okay today? You're kind of quiet. Are you just thinking real good? You're intellectually loving God with your mind right now? Now, I'm going to skip this part, but Mark chapter 12. So Jesus goes on and he talks about Pharisees and, about Scribes and how they go around and they wear all this stuff. And he's basically saying, listen, it's not a parade. This life of faith is not a parade. It's not a performance, right? It's a practice. It's a holistic approach. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't let your light shine. You should. But you're not just shining light. You're letting it shine. Now, and the problem that they were doing is they were doing all these things. They were checking all the list. Are you tracking? They were checking the list to say we're right with God. Everybody look at us, follow us. Let us have influence over you because we're right with God. And Jesus said they mistreat widows. And they walk around and they flaunt it. It's not a parade. It's a practice. And then in verse 41 in Mark 12, and he sat down opposite the treasuries in the temple, and he watched people put money into the offering box. Many rich people put in large sums. Come on. Thank you, Lord. And a poor widow came and put 2 small copper coins, which makes a penny. It's the widow's mite. Y'all have heard of the widow's mite? I think we got a picture of a widow's mite. Not actual size, by the way. The widow's mite. No wonder Jesus saw it. Got the mite. All my mite. Hey. So she takes these 2 little pennies, and it says there in your English standard version, it says two coins that make a penny. But it was actually less than a penny. It was a fraction of a cent. The 2 little copper coins. And she's in there in the temple. And she places them in there. And Jesus makes a statement about her. Truly I say to you, this poor widow has put more than all those who were contributing to the offering box. For they all contributed out of their abundance, their leftover. But she, out of her poverty, out of her need, put everything she had, all that she had, to live by. Jesus knows the treasury. He knows what's in there. He knows what we've invested. Some of you are terrified by that. But see, Jesus wasn't looking at what she put in. He was looking at what she had left. Because in this moment, she was not just loving God with her 2 mites. She was loving God with all her might. She was putting everything in this box. She was giving everything. She was risking ridicule. I mean, the religious that would sit in the room would scoff at an offering so small. That's all you're giving God. She didn't care. She didn't care. It was risky. It was all she had. It was her worship. It was the indicator of her heart. Because she didn't have anything left. Nothing left. She was risking it all. She was saying, God, I will have nothing. And you could look at it and say, was it reckless? I would say it was full of faith. Because she wasn't just putting something there that she had to give. She had nothing after that. I want to take you back to the story of the Pharisees. And they say, Jesus says, render unto Caesar that was Caesar's, and render unto God what is God's. But before that, he makes this statement, whose image is on it? Whose image is on you? Whose image is on you? Who were you made like? You were made like God. So give unto God. What is God? Give him your whole self. Don't give him just a little portion or a little ration or a little leftover. Be like that widow. Would we be poor in spirit like this widow that says, Lord? Because I believe this. I believe if she had 2 million, she would have gave 2 million. It wasn't what she put in. It was what she had left. Will you render unto God what is God's? Are you God's? Have you surrendered? Have you made him the center of your life? Have you surrendered that he is the point of life? That he doesn't want to make the list. He wants to be the point. Whose image is on you? And I love it that it says that they marveled at him. I think that the disciples, and when Jesus pulled them aside, I think that the disciples probably marveled at this woman because they were saying, man, Lord, we've left all to follow you. And they're looking at this woman going, she's leaving all to worship. She's leaving all to worship you. So how much does the Lord require? He's not requesting it. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. He's not requesting all of you. He's requiring all of you. Will you stand with me? Father, we love you so much. I loved it. Jesus just simplifies it. All. We love you with all. We love you with all. We love you with all, Lord. With all of our heart, with all of our soul, with all of our mind, with all of our strength, with the way that we treat others. Lord, that's our aim. I want to give you the opportunity this morning to render unto God what is God's. Maybe you would say that, Pastor, I haven't surrendered my life to God. But I want to. Can I tell you that Jesus knows that you failed to meet the standard, but he came for you anyway. He wants you anyway. Jesus paid a high price, a very high price where you've missed it. And he said, I will welcome you in. I'll take the penalty for you missing the mark. And I'll bring you right into my love. I'll bring you right into my heart. And I'll transform you. I'll give you a new heart. I'll give you a new mind. I'll give you a new spirit. I'll give you a new soul. I'll give you a new strength. I'll give you a new love for people. If you'll just render unto God what is God's.
Thank you so much for joining us at church today. Please subscribe to this channel and hit the bell for future notifications. We pray that you have a blessed week, and we can't wait to encounter Jesus with you online.